Welcome back, everyone. This is the Canadian Self-Storage Information Channel. I'm Patrick Wood, I guess somewhat your host or the person who runs the channel. Typically, I do this type of presentation in person at the Canadian Self-Storage Association meetings. However, due to current situations, it being December 2020, we don't have meetings. We don't meet in person. We've missed all three this year, and hopefully we'll get to have one in June. We did have a virtual conference back in November, but it's just not quite the same as being able to talk to people and get the information out there. And writing articles, I find, is not the best way that some people consume things. So this will be a video on YouTube, but also a podcast on iTunes and other places podcasts go. So today I wanted to talk about what we saw in the industry in 2020, given some tumultuous times across the world. Without going into too much detail, I think we all know that 2020 was a year full of quite difficult situations that maybe weren't the best for everyone in most industries. Thankfully, the storage industry typically fares a lot better than what we see in many other industries, whether that be hotels, retail, office, commercial space, restaurants, everything to do with that. So, storage has been kind of a bright light throughout the whole thing, and I wrote an article in June for the Mini Storage Messenger about this and what we'd seen during the pandemic, and I just kind of wanted to sum up all the thoughts now that we're coming to the end of 2020 and going into 2021. And again, this is sort of December 2020 is what we're seeing and what we've seen throughout. Things may change as vaccines roll out and economic stimulus rolls out and people get back to work, but we shall see. So in the early days of 2020, sort of March 16th and on, as the country shut down, we saw, for the most part, some pretty steady occupancy across the industry. For the most part, we saw people hold the line. Some places did lose a bit of occupancy, depending on where they're located. Most of the mid-size operators I spoke with said that they saw a few more move-ins and move-outs, especially in areas where they had stay-at-home orders. No one could really move out, so people kept moving in slowly, but no one left. The West seemed to fare better than the East on this, with operators in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan that I spoke with saying that they were having some of the better occupancy uptake years they've had in March for a while. Of course, rates were flat across the country. Most people didn't feel it appropriate to be raising rates in the middle of probably the largest economic downturn Canada had ever seen in one go. And that sort of held true for half the year. People also stopped most auction activity and also most collection activity and charging fees. Pretty much all transactions at that point came to a screeching halt. Some things that had been previously contracted were finished, but for the most part, nothing new was really done for a few months. As we got to mid-year in the summer and sort of our first wave was I wouldn't say over, but subsiding, the West opened up significantly faster than the East. I remember in May sending pictures and text messages to friends out in Toronto, having my first meal in a restaurant again. I think it was near the end of May. And they were months away from even outdoor dining at that point. And that's sort of what we saw for storage trends as well. The jurisdictions that opened up quicker, we saw a quicker return to sort of the summer leasing season. Occupancies were up out west. Alberta especially, southern Alberta was incredibly strong. Calgary was still flat, but holding, if not increasing slightly. Red Deer, that's a difficult market in general. So things were flat. And then Edmonton, things seemed to sort of pick up and be doing better as we got into the June, July, pushing into August. Transactions started being discussed and started happening again. I know I was involved in a few transactions that closed up in June or July, and then also started talking with groups who are looking to buy and sell, and it seemed like people kind of got going again. So we saw that. Move-outs started picking up slowly as well out west, but move-ins outpaced them, so occupancy continued up. In the east, as things opened up, we saw move-in transactions continue to increase. Move-outs did pick up, but not as much, and most of the operators, save for a few, especially a couple big groups that decided to close everything up for a few months, or at least I think 7 weeks. They saw some drop-off in rental activity and in occupancy, but everyone else seemed to hold the line or increase for the most part. I know the CSSA had done a study, and I think they said that 40-ish% saw increases, 30% were flat, and the remainder were flat or down 5%. No one was seeing huge precipitous drops. In the Maritimes, they were in their own little bubble, and from my understanding, things were pretty flat. You do have to remember that moving and mobility, real estate sales, all that kind of stuff is a pretty major driver of self-storage, and if people aren't moving, people aren't buying and selling houses, that's going to slow sort of the need for self-storage and the desire that people have to rent a new storage unit. One thing we did find very interesting was, especially in markets where light industrial space is very tight, Vancouver, before March, the light industrial vacancy was less than 1%, and as people scrambled to find more warehouse space to house goods that they weren't able to sell, or house goods that were incoming that they weren't able to move right away, or to also shore up their supply chains, we found a lot of people moving to self-storage to help meet those needs. I have a lot of clients who said that their facilities got full with people just renting space to store inventory because their storefronts were closed. We also saw, because supply chains did break down for a while, people starting to stock more inventory. And, as that happened, that did increase the demand for storage, which is great for the industry. Not sure if that will continue, but I do feel a lot of people got stung with not being able to get their products from overseas as fast as they wanted, and they're out of stock. Also, the medical supply chains were now bulking up on PPE, personal protective equipment, and other things, hand sanitizer, gloves, just basic needs that were hard to get. People are keeping a bigger inventory now rather than running a just-in-time type inventory system. So this is all kind of pushed demand, at least in urban centers. As the year kind of came to an end, so we'll say from mid-September until December now, I'm still hearing occupancies are up in most places. Rental activity has slowed, as it usually does, into the winter. Rates are moving again. People are starting to put small incremental increases in, kind of to test the waters. And everyone seems to have been, at least the people I've talked to, seem to be pretty receptive. They understand that everything's more expensive right now. Fees are coming back. People are starting auctions again. The industry is kind of getting back to being normal for the most part. Transactions are moving. SVI announced, I think, about $220 million in transactions, 14 sites across Western Canada and Ontario. Some self or non-arm's length, but owned by Access or associated groups. Some non self-owned, and all those prices, they seem to be pretty in line with previous numbers. Avenue Living / Mini Mall Storage out of Calgary, they're out purchasing across the prairies, and their numbers are as their model was before the pandemic. I think they've been very successful in getting some value buys from people who are looking to exit and caught it at the right time. I'm working to get Aaron Facca, their kind of operations guy, on YouTube and a podcast in coming weeks, so he can kind of maybe give us a bit more insight to how they're doing. But yeah, and then some other transactions that I'm privy to that can't really talk about numbers or anything yet, seem to be very close to post-pandemic or pre-pandemic levels post-pandemic. There's also been some people try to bring things to market at some very, very aggressive numbers in terms of valuation. There's been some people in the Metro Vancouver area talking like 4 cap rates, like 4.00. And, you know, not surprisingly, no one bit, but some people got pretty close. And you know, that's really interesting to see that although nothing sold, you know, knowing where people were willing to buy, you know, it speaks to the strength in this industry. And that, you know, is something that I think we'll cover in a different video. I don't want to kind of ramble on too long in this one. I know people's attention spans keep getting shorter and shorter, and I'll try to keep these under 15 minutes. So what do we see coming in the future? Well, it's kind of unknown right now. Canada's talking about rolling out a vaccination plan starting in January or in February or March, depending on when vaccines actually arrive. Lots of stimulus spending in the recently announced kind of fiscal update. So there's going to be a lot of money for small business and keeping people employed, and that's great for the economy and maybe not great for our taxes down the road, but temporarily it's good. And I think, you know, we'll continue to see, you know, strong storage demand as people continue to sort of move forward with their lives and what they're doing. So overall, you know, although this being a very trying year, the storage industry in Canada weathered it pretty well and came out maybe not as ahead as it should have, but definitely not behind. And it looks like we're coming into 2021 on a strong footing that will continue forward. So I hope in the next month or two to have some other industry participants, maybe some of the bigger players as well as some smaller players on the podcast and channel and see if we can get their take on it too. But overall positive, and that's sort of my take on where we've been in 2020 for rolling through the pandemic and the worst economic turmoil that we've seen in at least a few lifetimes. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, please feel free to check out our website below or drop us a line via the website or via the email below. And that's all I got for today.